Okay, so welcome to this week's spiritual journey. So this week I am very lucky to be speaking to Julian Jenkins, who is a spiritual medium, teacher and healer based in Cardiff. So welcome, Julian.
Hello, Lindsay. Thanks for having me. Very
You're
pleased to
welcome.
be here.
Yay. So I was just wondering, Julian, if you could start off by telling me, because I read on your blog that you met your spirit guide when you were only 5 years old. Is that right?
Yep.
And so how did you know that it was your spirit guide when you were 5?
Well, it's an interesting story. I think 5. I've given it a number, but it could have been 4, could have been 6.
Mm.
At that age, you don't really understand, and I can't remember what happened yesterday, to be honest. But it was around that period of time. And as a child, I was always growing up with imaginary friends. And in particular, every night I used to have somebody who would come into my room and take me away. And it was like astral traveling, really. And the only way I can describe the person who used to do it was, he looks like the gentleman off the front of the Uncle Ben's rice. That's the only way I can best describe him. And we used to go away, and I never used to think anything of it. And I used to go to school the next day, and I'd be talking about, I don't know, the pyramids or something. And I lived in a very poor part of Cardiff, and they're like, nobody ever went abroad. Nobody ever left Wales from that part of Cardiff. So the teacher was always like, well, how do you know all of this? And my mum really didn't understand it. And I had to go to a hospital because I was having convulsions, and they had to put this cap on my head, and they measured all of my brain activity. And I remember this as a child. I remember the hospital. I can remember everything about it, everything. I don't know how old I was then. And they said, oh yeah, he's got too much brain activity. We need to, and they put me on like drugs. They put me on a thing called erythromycin to try and slow things down. And what I didn't realize now looking back is actually that was spirit, and I've had it from an early age. And the reason I tell that part of the story is because I think when that happened and they tried to calm me down is when my guide came, because it was like as if they're saying, well, hang on a minute, we've put him through this, we're gonna have to go and give him a bit of TLC and a bit of support. And I remember being in my bedroom as a child and looking out the window, and there was a pathway used to run down the middle of 2 sort of grass lawns. And I saw this Native American Indian, stereotypical guide. I know I'm boring in that way, but that's who he is. And he started walking down the path, and having been around spirit for a very long period of time, I never actually gave any thought to it. And the next thing I know, he disappeared. And the reason he disappeared is he'd come in the house, and he walked up the stairs, and he walked into my bedroom. And at that stage, he didn't really say a lot, and he didn't tell me his name at that stage. He didn't say anything. All I knew that from the sense and the feeling that he was there to help me, to protect me, to be with me. And it was like, I can only describe it. He didn't say anything for many, many years, but he was always there, and he made me feel secure. And if ever I was struggling with anything, I could think, and it would come in my mind, and weirdly I would know that it came from him, because yourself, being a medium and a psychic, is that we operate on different vibration levels. In other words, I'm very succinct to subtle energy, so I can pick all the subtle bits up, and that's always been the case. And I knew innately that he was there and doing the bits and pieces, because I could feel his subtle energy, and I've had that energy with me all of my life. So it was, I suppose, that was the start of my spiritual awakening. And he's been with me ever since, and he's like my brother now, I suppose.
Yeah, because I noticed on your website that you do offer a meditation for people to connect with their spirit guides. And I didn't connect with mine until I think I was 36, and I kept listening to it. It was a Tony Stockwell meditation, and I listened to it every day for about 6 weeks. And finally, I had this image of, similar to you, a Native American Indian in front of me. And I was like, oh, amazing, you finally come through. I was so chuffed. And I said to him, what am I here to do then? And he just said, to teach. And I said, to teach what? And he just started laughing and disappeared. And I thought, I can't believe this is the first time I've met you and that's all you're giving me.
Yeah, 36 years in, and he's left you like the last scene of EastEnders.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think, you know, as I've progressed and my age has progressed and I've traveled that spiritual journey, I've learned more about him, and we have those conversations. And it was even till recently, you know, I'm not a big fan of flying, and we were flying back from Spain, and it was a very bumpy ride. And at the end, it's quite funny, and I haven't told anyone this story yet, but when we landed at the airport, I had the window seat, and he was actually sat on the wing, and he was just laughing, and I was like, yeah, boy. I said something else, but you know, and it is, and some people might think, you know, I suppose, is he gone mad? And is he crazy? Because you know, that's not the person a lot of people would have known me for. But you know, it just, I can't describe the relationship I have with my guide in particular, Ronnie. His name was Rotag. He showed me that. He showed me everything, really. He showed me where he was from, his reservation, his tribe, everything. Even one day, went on the internet. He said, right, okay, this is it now. So he showed me a picture. He said, and that's me. And I knew it was him innately because I could see him. It was a bit of a side picture. And when I clicked on it, there was his name, Ronnie, Rotag, and he told me his name was Rotag before. So you know, I suppose people say, yeah, but that, you know, what's the coincidence of me clicking on how many native Indian pictures in Google, and it's the name of the person he told me his name was all those years ago. And those sort of relationships are special, really, because you know, it's, you know, he's my friend for life and eternity, really.
Yeah. So everyone, so just a little bit about spirit guides. Everyone has a spirit guide, at least one spirit guide, don't they?
Yeah.
And that are with them. Yeah. So with them from when you basically incarnate. Onto Earth.
Yeah, and I think you have so many of them, and they all have their own specialities. And you know, when I talk about spirit guides, I talk about, you know, it's like, well, what do you mean by that? Well, you know, some could be an electrician, some could be a plumber, some could be, you know, a carpenter, for instance. And you're never going to ask the plumber to come and do your electrics, or your electrics to do your plumbing. So, you know, and that's why some of your guides come in, because they have, you know, specific roles and responsibilities and skill sets. I have Mayong, who's one of the healers. I have another trance healer called Dr. Carl Schultz, who he made himself aware to me when I was healing my dog, and he was a specialist in America in medicine, and I found him afterwards. My wife was sat there, and I was healing the dog, and I sort of said, right, who are you then? Because we'd been sort of working together for sort of 6 months, and I just thought, I'd find this out. It's quite a relaxed atmosphere. And he said, my name is Dr. Carl Schultz, and he told me who he was, and I went online and found him, and it was, you know, really eerie, I suppose, and a little bit spooky. But you know, his son had done like a video of his life, and I ended up watching this old video of his life that he obviously showed at the funeral. And it's those sort of things, really, that, you know, people say, yeah, and all the people who sort of this side of the fence or on top of the fence doing this, when you actually come up with some of the information that is imparted onto us, there's no way in the world any of us could have known, or I could have known any of that information about my guides. And I think some of that is beautiful, because it gives you that trust, that gives you that faith, it gives you that surrender, and long may it continue. And I speak to my guides every single day. I go to the gym every day. I lay in the jacuzzi, and I'll just lay there and I'll say, come on in, Ron, what are we doing today? And boom, 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 off we go, you know.
Yeah, I think, like, for myself, it brings comfort knowing that there's people. So I call them in my book, I call them my spiritual army. I might give you your spirit guides, you've got your angels, you've got spirits, etc. But with your spirit guides, it's like, it's because they have that knowledge as well and that experience. It's like you can just ask them, like you said, you can speak to them every day, you can talk to them, you can ask them for guidance. And even if you can't necessarily hear them, then the signs will appear, won't they, like in your path, do you know what I mean, to show you the way, etc. So.
And I think that's important as well, is that, you know, I don't know what, expectation is a big killer of spiritual development.
Mm.
People expect certain things, and some of these things, like the spiritual awakening or messages, they want a big bright light and Jesus stood at the end of the bed and all that sort of stuff. And the reality is, it's something very different. It's just a subtle change in how you think, in what you do, etc., etc. And I think it's I think it's hugely important that, again, go back to what I said earlier, is the subtle energies. It's being able just to stay open, and we miss so many things. We miss so much guidance. And there's a good book called The Celestine Prophecy, which talks about synchronization. It's a bit wacky. The film's terrible.
The film is awful. I just watched that the other week. I was like,
yeah,
really?
Yeah. But how many books are better than the film, I suppose, because
Exactly,
your imagination's better than anything that a director or a producer can do. But I think the principles of it is just be in the moment and be aware of around you. And if somebody walks past you and smile, say hello and say, how are you? And, have those conversations, because, I'm a firm believer that, nothing happens by accident. Even accidents don't happen by accident. If you think about a car that's leaving a house this morning with another car that's leaving another house this morning, and they have to leave at precisely the same time, go through exactly the same lights to get to exactly the same position, to be in exactly the same space, to crash into the back of that exact same car. You're telling me that's an accident? So some of these things, really, they're there, and we're not open to them. And I think the more open you can be, and the more communicative, that's a good word, communicative you can be, then, things will fall into place for you, both physically and spiritually.
Definitely. So just a bit about your background. So you haven't always worked as a medium, have you?
No.
As a spiritual teacher. So your background was in the sports industry, and you worked for Cardiff City Football Club for a long time.
Yeah.
So did you have these tools when you were working in the corporate side, or did they sort of come?
Yeah, no, I did. And I think, what you find is that when you're working with spirit for a long period of time, it sort of does this. It comes in and goes out. It never leaves you. There's this median line but you do this, you go up above it and you go below it and everything else. So I've always been with spirit, and I could tell you millions of stories, as a child growing up, and then a teenager, and then in my 20s, and then in my 30s. And a big catalyst for some of that change is when my dad died at 35, 46 now, so it's 11 years on. But yeah, I was involved in sport. The problem was, and I hope if there's anybody who's watching this that feel lonely because of being the way they are, in terms of being what I call a sensitive. And that doesn't mean, you're sensitive to what everyone tells you and you're just a bit of but this is about, picking up all of the energies really early and feeling different and just being different. And I think, being involved in the corporate world and in sport in particular, it was very difficult for me to actually come out and say exactly who I was, because it's a very alpha male environment. And I've had every week, what's the score going to be today then, Ju? All of that sort of stuff. And I wasn't ready for that. And I didn't want that. And I didn't want it to, at that point in my career, I was going for a career. I didn't want it either to inflate it or deflate it. So I kept that side to myself a lot of the way. But, as growing up in that environment and working within sport, one of the reasons I'm doing what I'm doing, and I'm trying to scale what I'm doing, is because of the age, I would say between the ages of 13 and probably 25, 26, 27, 28, I would have thought, my spiritual side was a very lonely place. And actually, I thought it was very much a burden and not a blessing, because I didn't know what to do with it. I had nowhere to go. I wasn't, and I'm still not today, hugely religious. I'm more spiritual than I am religious. I believe in God, I believe in Jesus Christ, but I believe in different versions of it. And that's probably another show in itself. But, coming back to it, I was very lonely and lonely in a spiritual sense, and not having anywhere to go or have anywhere to turn or to do anything was difficult. And I think that, why I'm trying to scale it and trying to make myself accessible and do everything I can is I don't want anybody to feel the way I felt. And actually, I want to help people who do think that they're gifts that they've got, and because they are as sensitive, we're 1% of the population, which means 99% of the population don't get us, and we struggle to get them on times, is a lonely place. And I want you to take away some of that feeling of a burden and actually realize that it is a blessing, that we can use these gifts. And I think going back to the original question, the transition was always difficult. And it wasn't until, you know, I played football. I was a professional footballer until I was 19 years of age. I had a serious knee injury. I lived in Manchester, came back to Cardiff, bounced around for a little period of time, did some sales and marketing stuff, and then went into Cardiff as communications director, and then ended up being commercial director, then ended up doing consultancy work for some of the major leagues around the world and became a chief executive of a football team in Geneva. I was the youngest British European chief executive at the age of 40. And I was just thinking, I was listening to Radio 5 and they were talking about stress and work and balance and all the rest of it. And it was a tough gig in Geneva. It was a very tough gig. We'd sort of been promised financial support that didn't arrive. And then on the back of that, it made life difficult. I remember flying back from Zurich to Geneva and I never have a nosebleed. And all of a sudden my nose started bleeding. And I was like, what's this about? And it was just the pure pressure of it all. And I think if it wasn't for my wife and for the beautiful place that I lived in the foothills of the French Alps, I don't know what would have happened. And, you know, it's difficult. And, you know, all of those things now I think have been that life journey for me to be able to transition into this and realize that, you know, going from having abundance of money and wealth and abundance of, you know, anything that I wanted, because when you're in football and when you're in a high level of football, you are in a bit of a bubble. And I had all of that. And then realized actually I had nothing, because ultimately my health was going the wrong way. My relationships were going the wrong way. You know, it was all becoming far too stressed. And that was difficult. And the reality of the situation, and I was talking to Sharon Rammel today about it, is someone I was just doing a course with, is that we put ourselves under innate amounts of pressure to buy things we don't need.
Yeah.
And that realization, you know, I've had the cars, I've had the houses, I've had the villas, I've had everything. And I honestly today, and just to manifest the transition, is that I'd struggled with spirituality when I was in the corporate world. And when I've come out of the corporate world, it was a bit of a, you know, oof, what's happening here type of thing. Albeit I've still got some businesses now that I'm looking to slowly move away from. Yeah. But the ability, I don't care now, and some people might not like the idea of this, but I could stand naked in a park today and have nothing and have everything.
Yeah.
Whereas when I thought I had everything, I actually had nothing. And it's that transition, moving away from the materialistic side of things to coming back and appreciating, which, you know, if I'd have said this to you, people say, shut up, what's the matter with you? You know, just appreciating walking the dog today before I come on here, and just the wind on your face, you know, the cold wind, appreciating that cold wind and just really enjoying it, and you know, coming in and think, oh, that feeling, oh, it's nice and warm in here, you know, and appreciating that feeling of really nice and warm, rather than, I'm not walking the dog, I'm gonna, you know, I'm gonna get someone to walk him for me, or, you know, whatever the scenario is. And I think I'm trying to move away from that and trying to become a lot more connected with myself, a lot more connected with nature, with people, with everything really, because I think that's where, you know, if you can have abundance there, you have real wealth. Because, you know, all the other wealth is man-made. And I think that's really important. And
I was reading, sorry to interrupt you, I was reading something the other day, and it said about how even though we think that we've abolished slavery in the physical sense, we've actually become, what did they say? Sort of like slaves to commercialism. So we're buying things that we don't need. We're buying things that we don't actually want. And and it's all sort of like to do with materialism, isn't it? Because it's like, well, we don't actually need that faster car. As long as we've got a car that gets us from A to B, you know, then we've got a vehicle, if you like. And it's about sort of like not always needing that next best thing or the next.
No, and I think that's half part of it as well, you know, and that's, you know, talking about the transition from the corporate world to the spiritual world. Is that transition as well from that thought process of having to have, you know, a very fast, expensive car, or, you know, whatever the scenario is. Now, look, I'm in many respects, I'm still happy. I'm still fortunate. I have enough money. I have a nice house. I've scaled my car back. I've done all of those things. But, you know, ultimately, you know, for me, again, every night I go to bed, I just thank the divine for, you know, keeping my family safe and well and happy, and, you know, and looking after us. And, you know, I ask, you know, it was like it was a new moon yesterday, and, you know, you can set your intention and manifestation. And a lot of those things now, I think when people talk about that, they think, oh, 6 numbers on the lottery or this or whatever. But actually, you know, my intention was manifestation was to carry on, you know, trying to get to the gym, trying to get healthy, trying to look after myself, make sure my family's safe, you know, and just having a happy life full of real abundance rather than materialistic abundance. So to sort of answer the question in a roundabout way, it's difficult on a number of tracks, but I'm so glad that I've made it, and I've had several offers to go back into football, and I don't think I ever will now. And I never believe in saying never, because, you know, I think you can nail your colours to the mast and say that we're going to be out of Europe by October 31st, otherwise I'll die in a ditch. Well, however much you like or don't like Boris Johnson, unfortunately, he's going to have to start digging his ditch. And so I think it's difficult to sometimes pin stuff to the mast, because you never know exactly what's around the corner, and we don't influence all the influences. So, you know, for me, I'm very comfortable where I am. I'm very happy where I am. There's a lot I need to do to make sure that I manifest that transition, and we'll probably talk later on about, you know, the wellness center and the spiritual college and project that I'm looking to build. But, you know, for me, I think if I can get through to 2020 happy and healthy, and start continually the transition from the corporate to the spiritual, or not, I don't mean corporate to the spiritual world as in mediumistic, but actually spirituality as much as spiritualism. And I think there's the difference. You can live a spiritual life, but spiritualism is when you work with spirit. Spirituality and having a spiritual life is just connecting with nature, connecting with the environment, vibrations, and everything else around you. I do spirituality and spiritualism. I don't know, that's the best way of describing it. I've never really split it up like that before. But I hope it made sense. So I think it is a long transition. It is a long road, but one that I'm really happy to be on, in a very slow car now.
Yeah, I think so having like a bit of a corporate background myself as well from retail, I used to compare it to, like, I would put a mask on when I went into work, because I couldn't be the authentic me that I wanted to in that environment. And I think that's why sometimes, you know, people say that they don't enjoy the work and that they do feel lonely, because they can't express themselves fully and be the person they want to be, because there's all these rules and regulations around it. So it's really interesting hearing sort of like your story as well about being in the corporate world and keeping your spiritual side a bit separate, because you don't want to blend the two. Do you know what I mean?
No, and I think even within family and friends, I kept it separate. And, you know, I could tell you lots of stories, but the one story which, you know, my father passed away, and I knew he used to call it, he used to go on a Wednesday night, he used to call it spook school. And he used to go, I think it was Circle, basically. And he used to go places. And I never really thought about anything. And when my father passed away, I knew I was doing some spiritual work previously, but I knew I had to ramp it up. And I had loads of really strong, powerful downloads, that I call them. And so I went back to church and went there a few times. And then I moved abroad to France. And I came back from France and I said to my wife, I said, should we go to church tonight? I haven't been to church for ages. She said, yeah, okay. So we went to church. And lo and behold, the medium didn't turn up. So they said, you know, would you go up? And I said, well, come on. I said, I've been away for 2 years. I haven't done anything. She said, go up. So anyway, so I went up, and as it is, Spirit never lay you down. And I started readings, and my brother walked in. Physically, he wasn't in spirit, but my brother walked in physically, and he sat down, and I could see his face, and he's looking at me, I'm looking at him thinking, oh my God. And he's looking at me going, what's he doing up there? And at the end of the evening, he came across to me, he said, look, Jew, he said, I just didn't know. I said, I didn't know. Why are you here? He said, well, I used to go to spook school with Dad on a Wednesday. And I said, well, he said, we used to come here. And there's like loads of churches, and that was for some reason I was drawn to. And he actually did say, you know, at one stage when I was on the stage, that he thought Jeremy Beadle or someone like that was going to walk out and go, got you, you know, because it was all. And so I even kept it that close to my family, and my wife knew, my kids sort of knew, but nobody really else. And that's why I had my spiritual world, i.e. going to the church, and everyone was like, why, who is he, or whatever the scenario is. And then my spirit, my physical life, which was completely different. So they never really blended, even to that point. And it wasn't until sort of 16 months ago, when I was going to Arthur Findlay College for a week's residential course, that I actually said, right, I've got to change this now. And I came out of the spiritual closet there and then. So it wasn't that long ago until I actually told everybody who I am. And I lost some friends, I gained some friends, but you know what? I'm me, and this is what I do. And you know, love me or hate me, I don't preach. I don't go around people's houses telling them what they should be doing, or, you know, if people want to talk about it, great. I'll never talk about it with drink. I'll never force my views or anything like that. I think it's, you know, for me, it's very organic, and I think we need to keep it that way.
So can you just explain, because there's a lot of terms that get sort of bandied around, and for people who aren't really sort of like au fait with spirituality or spiritualism, they're sometimes a bit confused. So can you sort of say what a medium is compared to a psychic?
Yeah, I suppose, you know, and people say, oh, can I be a medium, or can I be a psychic? The answer is yes to all of the above. But you know, I liken it to singing, that we can all sing. Some people make careers out of it. Some people empty places, and some people, you know, just have got a bell on every tooth. But ultimately, we can all sing, and I think we all have the ability to be psychic or to be a medium. And I think there's a very easy, clear demarcation between the two. And psychic work means that you're working with the individual's energy and the conscious mind. And that's, you know, you can work with somebody, read their energies, work with their mind, and look at their auric field, and dip in and then pull through the Akashic records. And, you know, again, there's another thing in there about all of that. And then a medium really is somebody who connects directly with spirit. So the ability to have that mediumistic talent to be able to connect with spirit, have conversations with them, do whatever we want to do, is one thing. And then working, you know, on a one-to-one, working with somebody's energy on a psychic level. And I'm a firm believer that, you know, I say I'm a psychic medium because I can work psychically or mediumistically, but the only thing I always caveat that with is that you should always tell the person or the church or wherever you're working that this is going to be a psychic demonstration, this is going to be a mediumship demonstration, or this is going to be a psychic mediumship demonstration. But I will tell you when I'm working which way around, because, you know, ultimately you can dip into someone's auric field and pull through memories and people and all the rest of it. And the people say, oh, is that my dad coming down from spirit? No, I'm just picking that from your energy. The reality is, when your dad comes down from spirit, I'll tell you he's come down from spirit, and I'll work with him spiritually. So psychic work is working, you know, energetically with the conscious mind. The one conscious mind allows us to do all of the, you know, the ESP and all that sort of stuff. And then mediumistically working directly with spirit, with our guides, and with, you know, our inspirers or loved ones or healers who are in the spirit world. I think, you know, that's a very simple-ish clarification of where they are. And I think I've seen people who are really good psychics, not very good mediums. I've seen people who are really good mediums, not very good psychics. There are some people who can, you know, easily flip between the two. But I always say, just make sure that when you're doing that, you ensure that people understand where they are, because you wouldn't want to think, because I'm working in your energy, that I've got your father or whoever it is, and that he's come to see you today, when the reality is he hasn't. He's just working in your field. And I wouldn't want anybody, because one of the things that we always get labeled with here is false hope. Because people don't believe what we're doing. But even when we're doing it, we need to understand where those messages are coming from, and how they're being delivered, to ensure that we don't give false hope.
Yeah, because so one of the questions that I got asked last night was, what was it again? It was about, oh, can you bring like my Auntie Edna through, for example? And I was like, well, I can't promise which spirit will come through. I said, because it depends on their personality as well, like what they were like on this side, as to what they're going to be like on the other side. I said, so if you imagine it's like a queue of people, if your auntie is really forthright and pushy and impatient, she'll be at the front of the queue. Whereas if she was very timid and mouse-like, she might be just stood at the back. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was saying as well that sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, spirits, after they've passed, they need to learn to communicate with us just as we're learning to communicate with them. So sometimes it can take time for that spirit to come through, can't it?
I agree. And again, one of the big lessons that I always teach is that although they are two worlds, i.e. the physical world and the spiritual world, they're exactly the same. And, you know, for me, you know, people say, oh, can you bring through Auntie Edna or whatever the scenario is? But the reality of the situation is, I haven't got that ability to physically say, right, okay, come on, Auntie Edna, because I can do it. I can set the intention of it. But as you quite rightly said, that the reality of the situation is, A, she may not be ready. B, she may not even be with me at that time. C, you're right, she might have passed over and needs to work on terms of her communication. There is so many variables in that. But what I will say is Auntie Edna will come through when Auntie Edna's ready.
Yeah.
And Auntie Edna will come through when Auntie Edna's ready and when she feels that you're ready. Yeah. And we don't force any of that. And people say, oh, that's a get out, that is. Well, it's not a get out. And I tell you what, if you think it's a get out, you might as well leave. Yeah. Because ultimately, you know, I'm pretty strict on the fact that I'm not a performing seal. You can't chuck me a piece of fish and I'll bring something else through. Yeah. I do it because I believe that it's healing, it's my vocation, and ultimately I'm trying to raise the vibration on the earth to get people to understand that when we leave here, our legacy is that we left it in a better place than when we found it. And I think, you know, if we can do that through spiritualism, through spirituality, through mediumship, through psychic work, then that's great. And if we can teach people, because ultimately people, you know, people say, oh, what is spirituality? Well, spirituality is just being nice. Just be nice.
Basics, yeah.
Yeah, basics, just be nice. And today, unfortunately, when somebody falls over, people either go through their pockets and kick them. It's very, you know, we need to pick them up and make sure they're okay and go even further, you know, make sure they get home or take them to the hospital or do whatever we do. And we don't. We all shirk our responsibility. I say, oh, I'm tired, everyone with the same brush. But the majority, and unfortunately, this is the way I see the pendulum going, is that we're too busy. We're just too busy. I can't stop because I'm too busy. Yeah. Unless it's something serious, then people stop. But you're thinking to yourself, and you know, and it's that type of thing. So, you know, I would again digressed a bit, but you know, I think it is difficult to bring people through, and people come through when they're ready. You know, and sometimes, you know, there's not a, you know, plug in, press A, press B, and you get C. It doesn't work like that. And again, that's not a cop-out. It's just the reality of the situation where it is.
Yeah. So you mentioned about leaving sort of like some sort of legacy. So do you want to tell me a little bit about the foundation that you want to create? So
well, we started building the foundation out from a legal perspective, because the one thing that I want to ensure is that we have complete transparency, because I think that's really important for people to buy into things. Unfortunately, again, you know, we've seen so many foundations and charities and all of these things then later find out that, you know, they were, should we say, not what they're meant out to be. And I always think of that lady in London who was that children's charity, the really flamboyant one, that was milking millions out of it. And I think for me, it's, when I've always had this vision 15, 20 years ago of creating a spiritual wellness center and college. So you'd have and it's great that we've had this conversation because it's actually helped me split it out. Yeah. So there's the spirituality wellness side of it, and there's the spiritualism college. So people can come and learn, you know, healthy eating, mindfulness, yoga, Pilates, like a wellness side to it. And then there's the other side, which is the spiritualism, which is looking at things like mediumship, psychic work, healing, trance, physical, you know, all of the other elements that go on within that. And I think what I'd like to do is create this center where people can come and just basically be, because I think we've gone from human beings to human doers, and we need to come back and be being again. And I just want people to have the ability to be able to come and get off grid and actually, you know, spend a day or 4 days or 7 days, however long they're going to be there, and actually, you know, reconnect with themselves, build a relationship with themselves, reconnect and build a relationship with the earth, with nature. And then if they so fancy it, with spirit and people on the other side. So, you know, that's my whole thought process. And I've been shown a place where I need to build it, and I never knew anything about it. And then they told me everything about it. And then they showed me what it needs to look like and all of these things and where it needs to be and all that. And it's just, you know, it's amazing. even to the point that, you know, it was probably about 10 months ago, I was walking where I thought it was going to be, and I was told that it needs to be near an old orchard, an apple orchard. And I didn't realize or whatever. And I'm trying to do a deal on a piece of land, and hopefully this is the piece of land. But when you look at it on the map, the road that backs onto it is called Orchard Drive.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. So all of these little bits and pieces that come into it is special. So, you know, my legacy is to build a wellness spiritual center with a spiritualism, psychic mediumship college, a spiritual college, because I think, you know, we all need to understand and learn exactly what's going on. Also, I believe that I think if you just go for a yoga lesson, for instance, is great. But I think if you can teach people yoga and then get people to understand the fundamentals of yoga, I think that whole practice and cultivation then of yoga takes on a different dimension and a different level, because your understanding and the meaning of it is so much stronger. So for me, I want people to come and just be and really be part of everything that's going on.
Yeah, it's really weird, because so it was through a client of mine that she introduced me to you, and I've told her about my vision, and which is of getting, like, finding a piece of land and just having that space that people can come to and just run workshops and do sort of, like, not necessarily retreats, but people can live there as well and grow vegetables, etc. And as soon as I told her my vision, she was like, you have to speak to Julian because he's had a similar vision.
Yeah, and I think you know, the great thing about it is I think ultimately everything's cyclical. So we've gone to having to, as you say, the corporate slaves. I think that's going to change. I think it's going to change over the next 50 years. I think people will start to go back to saying, well, actually, what do I really need? And, you know, one thing what's happened is we've got more, but we're time poor. So we're material rich. We're, you know, a lot of these things, you know, everyone's got a smartphone, everyone's got this, everyone's got that, everyone's got the internet, everyone's got everything. But the reality is we've got no time. And we're very time poor, and we're all trying to fit things in and rush things. And I think ultimately when we start to say, right, do I really need to earn all of that money? Why can't I just take a little bit of a cut, but have an extra half day at home or an extra day at home? And people say, oh, I couldn't afford that. No, you couldn't afford it because you have got the big house, you've got the big car, and you've got the big holidays, and you've got a big credit card. But if over a period of time, if you can move away from some of that and actually then come to the point where you don't need all of that, you know, write it down on a piece of paper. What do you actually need every month? And what does that look like and then boil it down again and see what that looks like, and try and boil it down again and say, no, what is the essential for you to live? And see what number that is, and try and earn that amount, and then try and have some additional time elsewhere, because, you know, I just think that, you know, we need that extra space, we need that time.
Oh, definitely. No, I agree. Fabulous. Is there anything else that you feel that you want to mention, Julian, before we wrap this up?
No, I just say, look, thanks for doing this. I think, you know, we need more people, you know, to be coming from the right angle, and that angle is that what we do helps people, you know, to live a happy spiritual life with clarity and purpose. And that's my mantra. My mantra in terms of my teaching is helping people to help themselves live a happy spiritual life with clarity and purpose. Because I think, you know, all of these things it's our journey, and everyone's journey is different. Even if you're in a relationship, your journey to the partner who's the closest person who I will to will be different, because you'll go to work and you will go somewhere else, or you'll go to the pub, or you'll go somewhere else, or you'll go to the pub and you'll go somewhere else. So your journeys are very different, even if you're, like, you know, joined at the hip. But, you know, it's about trying to be nice, trying to do the right thing, and expanding yourself, expanding your energy, opening your eyes, listening, being mindful. You know, we could do a whole thing about mindfulness and stress reduction and the epidemic that is taking place now of anxiety and depression, and all of that is being forced upon us because of the expectation of materialism. And, you know, it's never the problem, it's the problem. It's always our reaction to it. And actually not being able to afford a new iPhone, do you know what? doesn't really matter, does it?
Yeah.
But you have to keep up with the Joneses, and you have to do this, and you have to do that, and all of those things. So, you know, people like yourself who are out there doing the light work, and then also, you know, through shows and YouTube channels like this, you know, even if there's 100 or 100,000, you know, for me, it's great. And I was doing I've had to, again, time, but I've had to reevaluate where I can make the most impact on people.
Yeah.
And I was doing a show called That's the Spirit, and I wrote, his name will remain nameless. And I wrote to a famous medium in America and said, look, you know, we're trying to do this, and, you know, you coming on would really be good, and, you know, this is where we are and everything else. And I didn't even have a reply from him. I had a reply from a media company saying that they'd spoken to him, and when you get your followers up, you would be interested in
yeah. I've had this as well, and I'm just like, nah. I'm like,
my response was simple, and I'm not, please bear in mind, I'm not comparing myself to him, but
yeah.
Jesus Christ had 12 followers.
Yeah.
And he did all right.
Yeah,
so, you know what I mean? And I'm not saying I'm Jesus Christ, far from it, but, you know, it's an interesting concept, you know.
It's that
and
sort
I can categorically tell you now, if I have 1 million or 1 zillion, I will never, ever ask him to come on my show again, or I would never allow him to come on my show again.
Yeah.
And because I believe that he's not coming from the right point. We say, that's not very spiritual, Julian. You know, forgive him. No, not forgive. I will forgive. But ultimately, his energy doesn't vibrate the same level as my energy.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important.
I know. I do. I've had the same thing. So I'm looking at getting, so I've been finishing off my second book, which is all about continuing the spiritual journey, which is about divine feminine and everything else.
Yeah.
And I was looking at submitting it to Hay House Publishers. And they said you can submit it, but only if you have 5,000 followers on Instagram. And I just thought, I'm just going to self-publish it. Thanks, but no thanks. You know, it's not, for me, it's not about the numbers. It's about sort of like just getting my message across to people. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, the impact, isn't it? And you know, I think for me, you know, and we all start with 0, but, you know, if each one reaches 1,
exactly.
And if we have impact, and it's a bit, you know, it's a bit like evangelical or whatever, but if we can affect 1 person, then we're done, really, aren't we? And I think that's important. So well done. Congratulations on what you're doing. Keep it going. And if you ever need me to do anything else, I am always available.
Thank you. So if anyone wants to find you, Julian, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Best way to connect with me is probably via my website, which is julianjenkinsmedium.com.
Cool.
I have a Facebook page called Julian Jenkins Medium. I don't have Instagram, but I have Twitter as well, Julian Jenkins Medium. There's a common theme there.
I'll post the links as well underneath in the comments, so if anyone just want to get in touch, then they can do. So thank you very much, Julian, for coming and speaking with me on
Pleasure.
the journey today. Thank you.
Nice to see you. Take care.